Story 1. Whispers in the Fog. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows through the dense trees of the forest. I adjusted my flashlight's beam, trying to penetrate the enveloping darkness that clung to the woods. My friends and I had ventured deep into these woods for a weekend camping trip, seeking adventure and the thrill of the unknown. Little did we know how terrifyingly real that thrill would become. The evening had brought with it an eerie fog that crept along the forest floor, obscuring our path and distorting the trees into gnarled, grotesque shapes. The flickering campfire was our only source of warmth and comfort, its feeble light dancing uneasily in the thick mist. As we gathered around the fire, our nervous laughter echoed through the trees. It was supposed to be a fun adventure, a break from our mundane lives, but the forest seemed to have other plans. The sense of unease was palpable, growing with every rustling leaf or snapping twig in the distance. We heard a distant howl, and someone joked about it being a wolf. But it wasn't a wolf, it was something much more sinister. I shuddered, feeling a chill run down my spine. We tried to shake off the unease, focusing on roasting marshmallows and sharing ghost stories. It was all in good fun, we told ourselves. Hours passed, and the fog thickened. The once bright stars were now obscured by an impenetrable blackness. Our flashlights became our lifelines, illuminating only a few feet ahead. The forest seemed to close in on us, as if the trees were breathing, watching, waiting. That's when we heard the whispering. At first, we dismissed it as the wind. But there was no wind, not a single breath of air. The whispering grew louder, like the sinister susurrus of 1,000 voices, all conspiring in the shadows. My heart raced as I looked at my friends, their faces etched with fear. "We should go back to the car," someone said, their voice quivering. But as we turned to leave, we realized that the path behind us had vanished into an impenetrable wall of fog. Panic set in, and we stumbled forward, trying to find our way back to safety. The whispering grew louder, now resembling an unholy chant that echoed through the trees. Then we saw them. Figures emerged from the darkness, their forms shifting and indistinct. They moved silently like wraiths, their eyes glowing with an unnatural malevolence. Frozen in terror, we watched as they encircled us, their whispers becoming a cacophony of dread. I felt a hand on my shoulder, cold as death. I turned to see a twisted, ghostly face inches from mine, its eyes empty voids. A scream caught in my throat as I stumbled backward, crashing into one of my friends. "Run!" I shouted, and we fled blindly into the night, the ghostly figures pursuing us through the fog. We ran for what felt like an eternity, our flashlights flickering and dying one by one. The forest became a nightmarish maze, twisting and shifting, as if mocking our futile escape. At last we burst through the fog and found ourselves back at the campsite. But the campfire was gone, replaced by a yawning pit of darkness. We huddled together, our breaths ragged, as the whispering voices closed in around us. And then, in the blink of an eye, they were gone. The fog lifted, the forest fell silent, and we were left trembling and alone. The night had stolen our innocence, leaving us with a chilling realization that some horrors are all too real, lurking in the darkest corners of the world, waiting for the foolish and the curious. We never spoke of that night again, but its memory would haunt our dreams forever, a reminder that not all adventures end in tales of heroism and triumph. Some lead you deep into the heart of darkness, where the line between reality and nightmare blurs, and where the forest itself whispers secrets too terrible to bear. Story 2. Lost in the Shadowed Embrace. The darkness of the forest was all-encompassing as we sat huddled around the campfire. My girlfriend Emily and I had ventured deep into the wilderness for a secluded camping trip, seeking a romantic getaway under the stars. Little did we know that our desire for solitude would become a harrowing test of our survival. The campfire crackled and sent sparks dancing into the night, providing a fragile bubble of warmth and light against the oppressive darkness that pressed in on all sides. The moon was hidden behind a thick blanket of clouds, leaving us in a world devoid of natural light. Only the feeble glow of our campfire offered any semblance of security. We whispered sweet nothings to each other, trying to hold on to the romantic atmosphere we had hoped to find in this remote location. The forest, however, had other plans for us. A sudden chill swept through the air, and Emily shivered, her eyes darting nervously into the surrounding blackness. "I don't like this," she said, her voice quivering. I tightened my grip on her hand, trying to reassure her. "It's just the forest playing tricks on us, babe. Nothing to worry about." But even as I spoke those words, an unsettling feeling gnawed at the edges of my consciousness. Something was off, and I couldn't shake the sensation that we were not alone. As we sat there, the forest seemed to come alive with eerie sounds. Twigs snapped in the distance, leaves rustled with unnatural urgency, and the wind whispered secrets we were not meant to hear. Emily clung to me, her fear palpable. A distant howl echoed through the trees, sending a shiver down my spine. "Probably just a coyote," I said, my voice unconvincing even to my own ears. The forest, however, had more in store for us than the eerie sounds of the night. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Dark shapes flitted through the trees, barely visible in the dim glow of the campfire. I tensed, my heart pounding, and I grabbed the flashlight. I aimed the beam into the forest, revealing a sight that froze the blood in my veins. Figures, shadowy and indistinct, were moving among the trees. They were no ordinary creatures of the forest. Their forms seemed to shift and waver, defying the laws of nature. Emily gasped as she saw them too. "Who are they?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I had no answer. The figures moved closer, their eyes gleaming with an unnatural, malevolent light. We were surrounded, trapped in a forest that had become a sinister theater of the unknown. The campfire's light flickered and dimmed as if it were losing the battle against the encroaching darkness. I urged Emily to her feet, my hand trembling as I tried to keep the fear from my voice. "We need to go now." We stumbled into the night, the forest closing in around us. The whispering voices of the figures followed, their words incomprehensible and filled with a chilling intent. It was as if they were speaking directly into our minds, planting seeds of terror that threatened to consume us. We ran blindly through the forest, our flashlights cutting through the darkness like desperate beacons. The path we had taken earlier was gone, swallowed by the ever-shifting trees and shadows. Panic set in as we realized that we were truly lost, at the mercy of forces beyond our understanding. Hours passed, though it felt like an eternity. Finally, we emerged from the forest, breathless and trembling, but the campsite was nowhere to be found. The campfire had been replaced by an all-consuming void of darkness. We clung to each other, seeking solace in our shared terror. And then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the figures were gone, and the forest fell silent. We were left with a bone-chilling realization that some places in the world are best left untouched, and some secrets should remain buried in the depths of the night. We never returned to that dark forest, but the memory of that night haunted our dreams, a reminder that there are places in the world where the line between reality and the supernatural blurs, and where the romantic allure of the wilderness can become a descent into a nightmare from which there is no escape. Story 3: Vanishing in the Shadows. The forest was a realm of inky blackness as I sat alone by the campfire. My friends had joined me on this camping trip, but they had retreated to their tents, leaving me to enjoy the solitude and the crackling flames that were my only company. It was a moonless night, and the darkness clung to the woods like a shroud, suffocating and impenetrable. I stared into the fire, its flickering glow the only source of warmth and comfort in this desolate place. The wind whispered secrets through the trees, and leaves rustled with a haunting, unnatural urgency. I could feel the weight of the forest, the sense that it was alive, watching, waiting. An unsettling chill swept through the air, and I shivered despite the fire's heat. The unease that had settled upon me earlier in the evening now gripped me with icy fingers. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. As I stared into the flames, the forest's silence was shattered by a blood-curdling scream, a sound so full of terror and despair that it chilled me to my core. It was a scream I recognized. It was Sarah's voice, one of my friends who had gone to bed in her tent. Without hesitation, I leaped to my feet and rushed toward her tent, my heart pounding in my chest. I unzipped the flap and was met with a scene of horror. Sarah's sleeping bag was empty, her tent in disarray as if she had been forcibly dragged away. "Sarah!" I cried out, my voice trembling. There was no response, only the haunting echo of my own voice in the empty forest. Panic surged through me as I realized that something had taken her, something that lurked in the shadows of the night. I turned to wake my other friends, but their tents were empty as well. Panic turned to terror as I realized that I was utterly alone in this nightmare. The campfire's flames danced wildly, casting eerie shadows that seemed to reach out for me. A sinister whispering filled the air, a chorus of voices that seemed to emanate from the very trees themselves. They spoke in a language I couldn't understand, their words laden with malevolence. I stumbled backward, my mind reeling with fear. I knew I had to get out of there, to escape the clutches of this malevolent force that had descended upon our camp. I grabbed a flashlight and began to run blindly through the forest, the whispering voices growing louder and more insistent with each step. Hours passed, and I emerged from the forest, gasping for breath and drenched in sweat. The moon had risen, casting a pale, ghostly light on the clearing before me. The campsite was gone, replaced by an eerie emptiness that sent a shiver down my spine. I was alone, the only survivor of whatever unspeakable horror had befallen us that night. The forest had devoured my friends, leaving no trace of their existence. As I stood there, surrounded by the suffocating silence of the woods, I realized that I was not alone after all. The whispering voices had followed me, their words now clearer than ever. "Alone," they whispered over and over again, their voices a haunting refrain. And then, in the distance, I saw them, the shadowy figures of my friends, their eyes empty voids, their mouths stretched into grotesque grins. They were coming for me, and I had nowhere to run. The forest had claimed them, body and soul, and now it hungered for me.